They handed me a manila folder over dinner and told me to figure things out, right after my sister called me unreliable and my dad said I was a burden. No warning. Just a metal chair at the end of the table and a goodbye sealed in polite voices. Hi, I'm Lauren, 31. Former analyst, quiet daughter, the one who paid their mortgage behind the scenes for years. But apparently, I was never enough. What they didn't know? I kept every receipt. And when they tried to silence me, they handed me the very mic I needed. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I sat in the car longer than I needed to. The engine had gone quiet, but I stayed there with both hands on the steering wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal and watching the leaves dance across the sidewalk. Late October in Eugene always had that soft chill, like a polite reminder that the year was winding down. In the passenger seat beside me sat a bakery box tied with thin string. Inside were 6 pumpkin rolls, dusted with powdered sugar, just how Mom liked them. I'd picked them up from the co-op on 11th, even splurged for the good boxed wine and a pound of French butter. Not because I had money to throw around, I'd lost my job 3 weeks ago, but because walking into that house empty-handed felt unthinkable, like showing up without armor. I adjusted the sleeves of my sweater, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and forced the kind of smile that says, I'm doing just fine, even when your savings account is down to fumes and your inbox is full of job applications that begin with, unfortunately. When I stepped up to the door, I heard laughter through the glass, Vera's laugh, high-pitched and polished, like everything she did. I knocked twice out of habit and let myself in. The house smelled like sage, roast chicken, and lemon polish. It always smelled like that in fall, like holidays, like everything being just so. Mom turned from the stove without quite meeting my eyes. Oh, Dylan, you're early, sweetie. You can set the table. Dylan was my cousin. I blinked but didn't correct her. Sure, I said, lifting the grocery bag in one hand. Brought some things, too. Teresa Chen nodded absently and went back to basting. The dining room was already laid out. Napkins folded into swans, name cards in cursive. Vera stood at the far end adjusting silverware, dressed in a pale blue blouse and those slacks that never wrinkled. She looked up and smiled, sharp as ever. Lauren, there you are. And then I saw it. 5 cushiony dining chairs, all perfectly spaced, and 1 metal folding chair stuck at the end like an afterthought. My name card sat in front of it. I walked over slowly, trying not to make a face. Did we run out of chairs? Vera's tone was light, her back still to me. Well, you haven't really been around, so it just made sense. I placed the plates down carefully, willing my hands not to shake. Glenn came in behind me, smiling politely. He said nothing, as usual, just kissed Vera's cheek and took his place next to her, like a perfectly trained accessory. Dinner started without fanfare. Dad launched into a complaint about property taxes. Vera asked Glenn about his new client. Mom complimented Vera's recent yoga certification and how impressive it was to balance so much. No one asked me a thing. I tried to smile, to nod at the right moments. I sipped wine and chewed green beans I'd brought, and laughed once at a joke I didn't really hear. But by the time the chicken was half carved and the gravy had cooled to a skin, I couldn't keep it in. I have some news, I said, carefully setting down my fork. The room stilled just a little, enough for the silence to spread. I was laid off 3 weeks ago, department restructuring. Mom let out a small, "Oh, but it wasn't concern," more like surprise you forgot to thaw the turkey. Dad didn't look up. Vera raised an eyebrow. "Well," she said, her voice loud and crisp, "that explains the jeans." I waited a beat, then another. "I'm okay," I said, more to myself than anyone. "I've been applying. I just thought you should know. I'm not asking for anything." Vera leaned back in her chair, swirling wine in her glass like it was something theatrical. "That's why I told them you're unreliable," she said. "No job, no mortgage, no man. You've never really carried weight in this family." My mouth went dry. Dad cleared his throat and muttered, "Maybe it's time you stopped depending on us." Depending? I could have laughed if it didn't hurt, but I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just sat there, feeling the edge of the metal chair press into my back like a cold fact. Mom finally looked at me. She set down her wine glass gently and said, "We think it's best if you take some space. Get your bearings. Figure things out." Across the table, Vera opened her purse, pulled out a manila envelope, and slid it toward me like a restaurant check. "We already packed your things," she said. "They're by the door." My eyes darted from her face to the envelope, then to my dad, who was carefully slicing another piece of chicken. No one met my gaze. I sat perfectly still. Then I pushed back the metal chair, the sound sharp against the wood. I reached for my coat and the keys I hadn't even taken out of my pocket. "Thanks for dinner," I said. "I won't stay where I'm not welcome." No one moved. I stepped outside into the fall air, cool and clean. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime rattled, and behind me, the door shut with a soft click that felt like something final. The hallway light above Unit B2 flickered the way it always had, that soft, tired blink like it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to stay on. I stood in the corridor of the apartment I used to call mine, staring at the half-split cardboard box labeled in thick marker. Useless stuff. I didn't recognize the handwriting. That made it worse. The manila envelope Vera had slid across the dinner table just hours earlier now rested on the passenger seat of my car, unopened. But something inside me already knew what was in it. Not documents, statements. Control. Closure. On her terms. I knelt beside the box. It had slumped forward, edges softened by damp. Inside were kitchen towels, a bent whisk, a mug I bought during a conference in Chicago 5 years ago. I touched the rim and pulled my hand back. The ceramic was cold. Everything about the hallway felt colder than it used to, like the place had moved on without me. "Odell?" I turned. Mr. Romero from 2B stood in his doorway, cardigan sleeves pushed up to his elbows, a polite smile hovering on his face. "Didn't expect to see you," he said. "Your sister told us she owns the unit now. Thought you moved away." His voice was gentle, apologetic, like he wasn't sure if he'd just said something wrong. I forced a smile. "Yeah, things changed fast." He nodded slowly and stepped back inside. I waited until his door latched shut before turning back to mine. The door wasn't locked. There was no welcome mat, just a note taped to the wood. "Utilities off." I stepped inside and was hit by a smell I didn't expect. Lemon cleaner, faint but unmistakable. The kind Mom used when she wanted something to feel fresh. The air was stale, as if it had been scrubbed clean but left abandoned right after. The place was bare, no curtains, no furniture, just dust trails along the baseboards and scuff marks on the laminate floor from where things had been dragged out. I let my bag slip off my shoulder and hit the ground with a thud. This was the apartment I bought in 2017. I had poured almost all my savings into it when Mom and Dad were on the brink, when they whispered late at night about the mortgage, the taxes, the shame of foreclosure. Vera had said, "Let's put your name down for now. We'll adjust later when things are stable." And I believed her. I had believed so many things. In the kitchen, I found a stack of flattened boxes leaning against the cabinets. Between them sat a smaller, older file box. It was taped haphazardly, the edges frayed. I pulled it out and sat on the floor. Inside, a folder labeled Closing Docs. Arl's Unit B2, a bank receipt, a photo of the place before the remodel, and there it was, my signature, my bank statement, my deed. I blinked slowly, letting each page speak. I had signed everything. I had paid everything. Property taxes, the plumber when the sink backed up, the handyman who fixed the balcony railing. Quietly, year after year. Not because anyone asked, but because I thought doing so would earn me something back, a voice, a place, maybe even respect. Instead, what I got was a label written in black marker on a collapsing box. I leaned against the wall, knees bent, papers spread across the kitchen floor. No anger, just a numbness that sat behind my ribs like a weight. Later that night, I barely slept. I opened the manila envelope. It was what I expected. Vera's handwriting on a checklist, my belongings cataloged like outdated inventory. No apology, no explanation, just this place, stripped of everything but evidence. By sunrise, I was parked outside the Lane County Recorder's office, sipping burnt gas station coffee with a pen tucked behind my ear like I was someone with a plan. Inside, a woman named Janice sat behind a plastic shield, tapping away at her keyboard. "I'm looking for deed records for Unit B2 at 421 Pinecrest," I said, sliding my ID under the slot. My voice cracked a little on the address. She didn't notice. She typed, frowned, typed again. "Huh," she murmured, then turned the monitor slightly toward herself and squinted. "Looks like the deed was transferred in 2021 to Ava Arles." I paused. "Ava? That's what it says." She scrolled. "But the mortgage, it's still under your name." I felt the air thin. "Is that common?" I asked. "Not really. Deed and loan usually match unless someone refinanced under improper authorization. Happens, but it's not good." Her tone was cautious. "Improper?" I repeated, more to myself than to her. She printed the file. I stared at the paper, at numbers I recognized and one signature I didn't. It wasn't mine, not even close. I thanked her, walked out slowly, and sat in my car. The sunlight felt too bright. I closed my eyes and leaned back, the file still in my lap. It wasn't just a mistake. It was something worse. And I was only beginning to understand just how deep it went. The sky that morning was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that made it hard to tell whether the sun had risen or just given up. I sat in the waiting room of Thompson and Klein Law, flipping the edge of a manila folder with my thumbnail. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. Coffee felt like too much. Mr. Thompson called me in with a nod. He wasn't a man of many words. His office smelled like printer toner and lemon oil, and the blinds were open just enough to let in the dull light. He didn't ask how I was doing. That was one of the things I liked about him. "You were right to come in," he said after reviewing the mortgage file. "You're still legally liable for the apartment. The mortgage is yours. But according to the county, the deed isn't." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. "We'll start a formal fraud report," he continued, sliding a legal pad toward me. "I'll need a timeline of when payments were made, any communication with your sister, and copies of relevant documents. Don't try to organize it too neatly, just get it all down." I nodded. He didn't offer pity, and I didn't ask for it. That night, my phone rang just as I was folding laundry. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut said, "Answer it." "Odell," my mother said, her voice soft and syrupy, like warm tea. "We heard you've been asking around. Is everything okay?" There it was, sweetness laced with suggestion. I didn't respond. "It's just, Vera's worried. She says you're upset, that maybe you're not thinking clearly right now." That phrase landed like a stone in my chest. "You know, when people are under a lot of pressure, they sometimes misread things," she continued gently, "and you've always been a little sensitive." I closed my eyes, my hand clenched around the edge of the towel I'd been folding. "We're just concerned," she said. "That's all this is." I ended the call. The next morning, the hospital called. A woman named Carla from Dr. Murphy's office. "Hi, Miss Chen. Your parents booked you for a brief wellness consultation. It's very standard, just a quick intake." I stared at the wall. They mentioned some recent stress, possible difficulty sleeping, mood changes. I agreed to go. I don't know why. Maybe part of me still wanted to believe they were trying, in their own way, to help. Maybe some part of me still wanted to be the daughter who was worth keeping. At the intake desk, I was handed a clipboard with 2 pages stapled together. "There's a short release form there," the receptionist said with a smile. "Let us know when you're done." I sat down, pen in hand. The words blurred on the page. Observation, voluntary admittance, extended evaluation under clinical discretion. My stomach turned. And then, I don't even know how she knew, one of the nurses walked behind me, leaned in just close enough and whispered, "You don't have to sign that unless you're here voluntarily." Her voice was calm, neutral. She didn't look at me again. I froze. I hadn't even noticed my hand moving, pen already uncapped. I capped it. I stood. I placed the clipboard back on the desk and walked out. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I barely made it to my car before my hands started shaking. They didn't want me gone. They wanted me silent. They wanted a version of me that couldn't testify, couldn't challenge, couldn't prove. A version tucked away in a quiet facility with muted lights and polite supervision. I drove home with my fists clenched so tight I left crescent marks in my palms. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table. The heater buzzed to life, but it felt like nothing warmed the room. I stared at my phone for a long time, then finally called Mr. Thompson. "They're not just disowning me," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "They're trying to erase me." There was a pause on his end, no surprise, just a careful silence. "We'll file for immediate documentation protection," he said. "From this point forward, keep every message, call, and letter." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. After we hung up, I went to the closet and pulled out the old journal I hadn't touched in years. It had a worn leather cover and a faded ribbon bookmark. I opened to a fresh page and began to write. Not poetry, not reflection, dates, payments, emails, text exchanges, phone calls, the hospital appointment, the nurse's words. Not for them, for me. I don't shout, I document. And apparently that's enough to make me dangerous. By mid-November, my kitchen table was no longer a place for coffee or breakfast. It had become a battlefield of paper, stacks of receipts, copies of utility bills, notarized tax records, 2 thumb drives, a few birthday cards, faded from time, where Mom had written things like, "We're so proud of you," and "You always come through when we need you." I kept those too. I had Post-it notes stuck to the edges of folders, green for taxes, yellow for mortgage history, pink for Vera's emails. The manila envelope from dinner night sat in a corner, untouched, like a bruise I didn't want to press. Mr. Thompson came by that morning with a portable scanner and a legal pad. He wore a scarf too long for his coat and set down his briefcase with the kind of care usually reserved for breakable things. "We'll sort by category," he said. "Chronologically, if possible." I nodded. I didn't have much to say. "I've seen messier fraud cases," he added, "but not many with this much emotional proximity." I wasn't sure if that was meant to be comforting. We worked in silence for a while. I scanned the 2017 deed with my signature. The repair invoices, a text thread from Vera dated 2019. "Hey, can you cover the garbage bill this month? I'm drowning in work stuff." Another message, "You're better at dealing with contractors anyway." Each one landed with the weight of memory and the echo of 100 quiet surrenders I hadn't realized I'd made. After Mr. Thompson left, I made a cup of tea and sat at the edge of the couch, laptop open on my knees. The inbox dinged. Subject line, "We need to talk." From Amanda Reyes. I didn't recognize the name. "You don't know me, but I used to work with your sister. We need to talk. It's not just you." There was a phone number, a time, a place. I hesitated for almost an hour before replying. That night, I sat in the corner of a dim cafe off Walnut Street, the kind of place with wood-paneled walls and mismatched mugs. There were only 2 other people inside, both hunched over laptops. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows like it wanted to be heard. Amanda was already there, mid-40s, neat blouse, dark circles under her eyes that no concealer had managed to hide. "I ordered chamomile," she said when I sat down. Felt like a chamomile kind of conversation. I gave a small, tired smile. "Thanks." She didn't waste time. "I worked with Vera 5 years ago," she began. "She was sharp, charming, impossible to pin down, and when she wanted something, credit, control, attention, She knew exactly how to get it. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward me. "Archived chats," she said. "I saved them, back when I didn't know what else to do." I read quietly. A flurry of messages, Vera praising Amanda's designs, asking her to let Vera handle the client conversations for clarity, followed by threads of slow dismissal. "That's not how I remember it. I think you're confused. Let's not embarrass ourselves." And finally, the one that stopped me. "No one's going to believe you anyway." The words made my spine go cold. Amanda took her phone back, folded her hands around her mug. "That line," she said softly. "She used that same line on me. Exactly the same." I nodded, throat too tight to speak. "She makes you feel like everything is your fault," Amanda added. "And when you try to speak up, it's already too late. She's rewritten the story." I looked down at my own tea, now cold. "It took me years to trust myself again," she said. "But you, what you're doing now, keeping track, that's what saves people like us." We sat in silence after that. Two women tethered by the same shadow, finally meeting outside of it. Later that night, back in my apartment, I placed my phone on a stack of cookbooks, adjusted the angle, and stared into the lens. I didn't fix my hair. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't even plan what to say. I just pressed record. "You've heard their version," I said quietly. "Now hear mine." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I uploaded. The video was just under 12 minutes. No music, no transitions, just my voice, steady and plain, layered over documents and emails I had spent weeks organizing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish. I didn't offer a backstory filled with emotion or plea for sympathy. I simply told the truth. I started from the beginning, how I'd co-signed a mortgage to help my family during the recession, how the deed had been transferred to my sister 2 years later using a signature that wasn't mine, how the mortgage had never left my name. I included screenshots, invoices, text messages from Vera asking me to handle the boring stuff because she was too busy with work. I included the hospital paperwork, the voluntary release form, unsigned. And then I let the words settle. "You've heard what they say about women like me," I said near the end, my face still and unsmiling, "that we're emotional, difficult, that we remember things wrong, but I kept records, and that's the difference." I hit upload just before midnight. I figured maybe a few people would watch, maybe a local Facebook group or a friend of a friend would pass it around. By breakfast, it had 30,000 views. By lunch, it had doubled. The comment section grew faster than I could read it. Stories poured in. Same thing happened to me. My brother forged my name on Dad's will. "She's what strength looks like." "Watching this with my daughter. We believe you." Some of them weren't stories, just simple acknowledgments. "I see you. I hear you. You're not alone." I read those slowly, like medicine. By Thanksgiving morning, I was trending on Reddit. Someone had compiled a thread titled, "Financial Gaslighting: How Families Weaponize Trust." My video sat at the top tagged, "Proof plus Receipts." The thread itself had thousands of upvotes. People had pulled screenshots from the documents I'd shown, highlighting bank statements, drawing arrows toward mismatched signatures, quoting my voiceover word for word. Vera stayed silent for almost 24 hours. Then she posted a video of her own. It was filmed in the dining room of my parents' house, the swan-folded napkins in the background just like always. Her makeup was perfect. Her tone, measured, sorrowful, just enough edge to imply victimhood without sounding harsh. "I've always tried to support my sister," she said, blinking slowly, "even when she pulled away, even when she misunderstood things." Then the carefully curated phrases began. "Some people twist facts to paint themselves as victims." I never intended to hurt anyone. Families are complicated. The comments didn't go her way. This screams guilt. Why is she speaking like a teenager caught cheating on a test? She's trying to gaslight an audience with receipts. By the end of the day, Amanda Reyes went public too. She shared her own story in a quiet, written post on LinkedIn, then cross-posted it to Facebook and Reddit. Screenshots of her conversations with Vera appeared time-stamped and orderly. Her caption was simple: "This isn't just Lauren's story." She used the same words on me. Same playbook, same ending. I kept the messages. More people followed, not just women Vera had worked with, but strangers, each with their own versions of silencing, coercion, dismissal. A slow groundswell of women and men who had once been called too emotional and now had found a shared rhythm in telling the truth plainly. Then came the leak. Someone from inside the mortgage lender, anonymous, released an internal audit log showing that the down payment in 2017 had come directly from my personal checking account, that I had been the sole name on the original loan, that the refinance paperwork hadn't been properly verified. The file landed in my inbox with no message, just a subject line: "This shouldn't have happened." I forwarded it to Mr. Thompson immediately. That afternoon, he filed a formal emergency injunction and a motion to transfer the deed back. But it wasn't just based on fraud. He had found something more powerful buried in an old estate clause from my godmother's trust, a line that had been overlooked until now. If I had provided at least 5 consecutive years of financial support to the household, including property taxes, maintenance, or mortgage payments, the house would legally belong to me. He handed me the printed copy with a yellow tab marking the clause. "This is ironclad," he said. "They can contest it, but the record is on your side." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. That night, as the sun set on Thanksgiving Day, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Vera. "You promised you'd never use that clause." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed, "You promised you'd never weaponize me." And for the first time in years, I didn't care whether she replied. They wanted me quiet. Instead, they gave me a microphone. By mid-December, Oregon air had turned sharp and dry, the kind that made your breath visible and your silence feel louder. I had stopped refreshing the video views. It didn't matter anymore. The story had traveled farther than I'd ever planned, and somewhere along the way, I stopped needing to prove it. A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox that Friday. No return address, but I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. My mother's. Inside was a folded letter on cream stationery. The first line read, "We're your family, and family doesn't cut ties." There was no apology, no reflection, just a statement dressed up as a reminder, or maybe a leash. I folded the page neatly, pressed it under my coffee mug, and let it soak up the ring of condensation at the bottom. I didn't need to read the rest. I'd spent most of my adult life reading between their lines. This wasn't reconciliation. It was control, with a softer voice. That afternoon, I drove to the house on Pinewood Circle one last time. It stood empty now, the furniture gone, the walls bare. There was a light film of dust on the hardwood floors, interrupted only by the echo of my footsteps. In the kitchen, I placed a folder on the counter. Inside was a signed transfer deed. The house was now legally donated to a women's shelter operating in the county, the kind that helped people escape not just violence, but silence, the kind that made you question your own worth until there was nothing left but apology. On the envelope, I had written in black ink, "Build safety here, where mine never existed." I walked through each room once more, not to revisit the past, but to ensure I hadn't left anything of myself behind. As I stepped out the front door, I saw Mrs. Dale from across the street standing on her porch in a red cardigan, her little dog at her feet. She squinted in my direction and called out, "Didn't think you'd ever come back." I smiled, hand on my car door. "Only to give it a better ending." She nodded once, like she understood more than she said. Back home, I unpacked a box I hadn't opened since October. Tucked inside an old winter coat was something I hadn't even remembered packing, a small silver pendant in the shape of a leaf. My mother gave it to me when I was 11. I'd stopped wearing it the year she called it childish. I held it in my hand for a long time, then walked outside and tied it to the thin branch of a tree above the garden path behind my building. It swayed gently in the wind, catching the last bit of late sun. "I used to think love looked like sacrifice," I whispered. "Now I know real love doesn't demand your silence." That night, I made tea and opened my journal for the last time. I didn't write a plan, not a list or a warning. Just this: I don't need revenge. I just needed to stop being used. I used to beg for a seat at their table, even when it cost me every piece of myself. But the moment I stood up, I realized I could build my own. So no, I don't hate them. I don't need them to suffer, because healing isn't about making others hurt. It's about choosing not to hurt yourself anymore. And to the one still wondering, have you ever been called ungrateful just because you said no? I'm listening. As I stood in the quiet of my own garden, watching that little silver pendant catch the light, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had finally stopped asking to be chosen by people who only loved me on their terms. Sometimes love comes dressed as duty, but real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It listens, it honors, and it never calls you too much for simply wanting to be safe. If we've learned anything from stories like mine, it's that silence is not the same as peace, and speaking up, even softly, can change everything. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, your voice is the one someone else needs to hear.